just want to start off by acknowledging the fantastic leaders and the team that we have here. We have our city administrator, Justin Johnson over there, our budget administrator, Ronald Johnson, no relation to my knowledge, next to him, and John Maker, our communications director from the city, and our finance director, Erin Rosen, here today. We have some wonderful volunteers from Spur, the League of Women Voters, and many other organizations. So just to start off with a brief bit of context. Oakland is facing the worst financial crisis we ever had in history. And I know administration after administration says, well, ours is the worst. Well, ours is the worst. Truly, the city has never experienced a $280 million structural budget deficit in history. And I say that to say that we are in the middle of making some extremely tough decisions. So just to explain where we are in this process, and there's going to be more of an explanation here. The interim mayor, Kevin Jenkins, proposed what's called the mayor's proposed budget that came to public view in early this month. What happens now is that council is partly having a series of town halls across all districts so that we can get your feedback on the mayor's budget and see what we can do to propose amendments. Mind you, this is a year with extremely little wiggle room to move money around and to find new money. For context, I am only 2.5 years in the job, but I am now a council elder. So all that I can to try to find money where we can't fund, in order to be able to fund basic core city services. I'm co-chair of the budget team along with Councilmember Rowena Brown, and we are leading the process to identify potential amendments that council can make, and that's why forums like this are helpful. And today's presentation is going to come from our finance department and the city administration, who will explain what the interim mayor's proposed budget is. And what's been released again is the interim mayor's budget, and you will all have the opportunity to ask questions or make your statements heard. There has been an extremely high volume of questions we have already gotten before coming in here. And my team, let me shout out to Jared, Rebecca, and Iris, who are here today, have done everything possible to make sure we can get a broad swath of questions answered. We are still taking questions on index cards. So the ones that you see in front of you are ones that you can write your questions on, and we will have volunteers and staff go through the aisles throughout the first half of the presentation to collect those, and we're going to try again to get to as many as possible. If we don't get to your question today, we will be submitting them to the finance department to see if they can give you a response as well. So with that being said, I just want to briefly state that what you have in your seats is also a document of my district for budget priority. I'm not going to spend too much time going over them because they're there in front of you, but in the course of creating amendments, these are the guiding principles with which I'm working on, with public safety being a #1 priority for most of the city, economic development, but really revenue generation. Some of you might have gotten a copy of my op-ed editorial back there, which talks about elections and making sure we're being proactive about collecting revenue that's owed to us as a city, like parking enforcement, like business license taxes, and many other categories of very unpleasant fines and fees and taxes we no one wants to pay, but it's essential to making sure the city of Oakland can get up our revenues and do everything we can to provide core city service. Now with that, I will hand it off to Sean to kick us off, and I'll say a few words at the end. Thank you to all our volunteers and all of you here for listening, and I look forward to an engaging dialogue.
Thank you all for being here. I'm excited to be part of the team that's getting to meet with you today. My name is Sean Maher. I work for you in the city administrator's office as communications director. We're going to kick it off. We want to start getting some input from you right away in this meeting today. So we asked folks who have a smartphone on them who'd like to participate. If you could throw your camera screen on this QR code, it should give you an opportunity to pull out a web page that's going to be called Mentimeter. This is an opportunity for you right now at the top of this meeting to tell us. We're going to ask one core question. We want to make sure that we're hearing. When you think of budget, when you think of the city's budget, what is the first word that comes to mind for you? What is a priority or a question or a concern that you have? We're hearing some already put in the air. We appreciate that. And of course, we're gonna ask for folks to add your feedback, to this meeting as well. We heard a few really great, priorities or concerns or questions already voiced here. We're gonna give you just a couple of minutes to submit some words here, and then we'll read them off, so we're able to see what everyone here has top of mind here today. Let's just take a minute. All right. Yes, ma'am, we're gonna get to those questions. All right, let's come over to the next unit. So what word comes to mind when you think of budget? We've heard a few good ones that were shared. Are folks able to submit responses? Is the tool working for it?
Yes, that's a question that populates.
Oh, different questions coming.
Yeah, it's a question.
All right, well, let's take the next 60 seconds to do a quick lightning round like we were doing a moment ago. We heard concern about bankruptcy. We heard concern about I heard public safety. Well, taxes. Thank you very much. Let's go hand by hand. But who's you said one more.
Measure U bond sales.
Measure U bond sales. Thank you. Who else has a hand up? Over here in the red.
Nonprofit.
Cleaning out the nonprofits. Thank you. All right, you.
Not giving me parking tickets when I deserve them.
Not giving me parking tickets when I deserve them. I deserve them, she said. In the blue. Regressive tax structures. We're getting a lot of good ones. In the back standing.
Pedestrian safety.
Pedestrian safety. Thank you.
Union contracts.
Union contracts. Thank you. Inequity. Thank you.
Police overtime.
Police overtime. Yes, we've heard about that at all of these. Thank you for raising it. We'll definitely be talking about that in the front. Mental health services. Thank you. In the back. Consultants. In the blue.
Using restricted funds.
Using restricted funds. We'll take these two more and then we'll get into the rest of the presentation.
Corruption we haven't found out about yet.
Corruption we haven't found out about yet. And in the very back.
Encouraging businesses to stay.
Encouraging businesses to say, did I hear you right? Great, fantastic. Thank you all. That's really valuable to hear. We'll take one last one from the gentleman with his hand up.
Potholes.
Potholes, also very important. Great. So, thank you all for that. That's gonna help our presenters hone in what we're gonna be talking about on some of the topics that you've raised. We have gotten some questions on the topics that you all just raised, and we're gonna dive into the presentations in just a moment, but first.
Thank you so much. Among some of the many volunteer organizations that are here today, we have our volunteer group of commissioners known as the Budget Advisory Commission. And before I let our commissioner, Jane Yang, say a few words, I just wanted to say that earlier today, yesterday and today, we've had a collective 12 hours of budget study sessions where every department has been giving very, very in-depth presentation on their budget scenario. And this earlier this afternoon, we heard from the Budget Advisory Commission. And I want to use a phrase that they used to describe the mayor's proposed budget, which was a much more honest and refreshing approach than last year. Many of you who follow my newsletter, social media know that I did not vote for the budget last year because it used a high amount of one-time revenues. Anticipated revenues from the sales of Coliseum, which has not been finalized yet, for incorporation in the budget, which of course had a lot of consequences, including needing to get into our contingency budget, make a lot of last minute cuts to various contracts for nonprofits, the closure of fire stations, which we were able to reopen. Now is the first time in 20 years that all 25 stations are open. But that decision led to a number of consequences that we are still seeing to this day, including a decline of our credit score, which of course impacts our ability to sell bonds and apply for money that's going to help us pay growth, build affordable housing, and a lot of other things. We are still selling bonds. That's been a fight that we have pursued as well, and that is still happening this year. But all of that to say, I want to acknowledge the effort that went into creating this budget, which in my perspective, compared to last year, is in fact that much more honest and refreshing approach that uses extremely little one-time revenue for recurring expenses, because that's not how a sound budget should be. And with that, way too long introduction, Commissioner Day.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Ramachandran. Hello, everyone. My name is Jane Young. I am the chair of Oakland's Budget Advisory Commission. We are a group of volunteer residents of Oakland who really care about the city, like all of you, because you're spending your Thursday evening here to talk about the budget. I think I've only just got a couple of minutes, and so I just want to highlight a few things about what the Budget Advisory Commission does. We are essentially a group that is charged with helping make recommendations to City Council around the budget, not just the substance of the budget, but also the process of developing the budget, which includes things like this town hall and making sure that folks who are everyday, residents of Oakland get a chance to voice what is important to you about the city that we live in and how we want to make our budget, which is a moral document, reflect our values and address core services that we need. I want to give a huge kudos to District 4 because when we fielded the Oakland resident survey earlier this year, District 4 showed up, and you all had the most responses of all of the districts across Oakland. I believe your specific commissioner is currently attending his son's graduation. But a shout out to Commissioner Mike Petahoff, who represents District 4 in the Budget Advisory Commission. We do have some openings on the commission. So for those who are interested in serving your city, what we do is we go out and we talk to folks. We ran the resident survey this past year to help inform City Council on what are the priorities that we're hearing from the community. Some folks went out and clipboards and made sure that we could get the voices of some of our neighbors who live outside. Some of us are data wonks, and so we spent long evenings actually analyzing the data, preparing presentations. Just today, we had some folks who presented to City Council and outlined key recommendations based on the mayor's proposed budget. So I want to thank everyone in the city and council for listening to us and for the opportunity. And if you have any questions about the Budget Advisory Commission, I'll be here, happy to chat with folks. Thank you.
Let's give a warm thank you, please, Commissioner. Really, so we have the leadership of this really important community-led commission here with us. Thank you much for being here. Thank you, the whole commission, for all of your work. We get a lot of questions at these. Coming here and participating today is one really important way of being a part of the process. Communicating with your council offices is another great one. You're bringing a little bit of both here today. Sometimes people ask, what more can I do? How can I be more involved in the Budget Advisory Commission? It's a great way to do that. So I'm gonna try to keep my piece of this presentation short. I want to make sure that we're all heading into the discussion about what's being proposed with the same baseline of information about how the process works. So some folks here may already know a little bit of what I'm going to walk through. I'm going to try to go through it pretty timely. I know what you're really interested in is what's actually being proposed and what are the answers to the questions that you raised. So we'll try to move through this next section pretty quickly. So the city of Oakland operates on a 2-year budget process. We're heading into the final stages of that right now. The budget proposal that the Councilmember Ramachandran spoke about was released in May by interim mayor and the city administrator. The leadership of that process now belongs to the city council and to their engagement with you. So they are going through the process between the end of the beginning of May and the end of June to take that proposal and make it better. So we're in the middle of that process now. And then at what we call the mid-cycle, 1 year from now, we'll do kind of a tweak to that. We call that the mid-cycle adjustment. This presentation is online. It goes into some of the details about where funding comes from, what it typically needs to be used for. I'm going to move quickly past through most of that. Again, it's on the city's website at oaklandca.gov/budget if you're interested. We're also happy to be taking questions on it, but I want to again get to the meat of it today. A few basics that are really important though for the baseline of the conversation. One really impressive number off the top is that the city's annual budget is $2.3 billion. That sounds to everybody like a lot of money, and it is. It's a significant amount of money, but it is not the same as the amount of money that our city council and our elected leaders are making choices with. Oftentimes when we're talking about the budget, we're talking about what what do we have discretion over? What can we move up and down because we want to prioritize or deprioritize something? And generally speaking, when we're talking about that, we mean the general purpose fund. That's funding that our electeds can make a much wider range of choices with, relative to what we call our restricted funds. Those are funds that are brought into the city for a really specific purpose and have to be spent that way. So, for example, if we go out for a grant to fund a project in a park, and we got the funding based on an approval of that project, we have to spend that money on that project. That kind of thing, or a dedicated tax that really has to be spent on a specific service. That kind of thing makes up about 2/3 of that 2.3 billion. So still a significant amount of money to make decisions with. It's still really important that we recognize that, but it's just one piece of context that I think is important to having that conversation. Another really key thing, and the council member led off with acknowledging this, is that we are heading in, we are dealing with what is frankly a years-long structural deficit that is especially challenging right now. And a lot of where that comes from, when we talk about structural deficit, is debts and obligations that the city already has. So a big source of this, for example, is our retirement and retiree benefits funding. So think about, employees who have spent a career, who spent a lifetime of public service under an agreement with the city, under agreement with all of us, not getting Social Security. This is an important another nuance that city employees do not get Social Security when they retire. They depend entirely on a pension. So what we have often when we look at the structural deficit is this amount that we owe to employees who have already worked a career and have retired, and we owe them that support, and the cost of that support goes up over time faster than our revenue does. So thinking about, like, as healthcare has gone up the last few years for individuals, and that's affected your budget at home with your family, that's been true for us with everybody who's put in a career of service at the city. So we're dealing with some of the same challenges, just at a larger level. And the other thing that I'll just get in the air before we get into the actual budget presentation itself is that the city has to pass a balanced budget. The proposal that was released in May is a balanced budget. We are required by law to budget for no more than the revenues that we're bringing in. So another really important constraint on our decision makers is to stay within those legal boundaries and make sure that what we adopt is balanced. So with that, I will hand it over to our budget administrator, Bradley Johnson, and we'll get into what's actually being proposed.
Hello. Real quickly before Bradley speaks, just a reminder that if you are filling out a question, please do so now. We're gonna have staff coming to collect them in just a moment. They're gonna be coming up and down the aisles. So just a last call to fill out your questions now, and they will be collected shortly. Thank you.
All right. The charge given to us by Interim Mayor Jenkins was to propose a budget that focused on public safety, fiscal stability, addressing our structural deficit, and prioritizing the core essential services of municipal government. And this is a charge we took not lightly as in terms of developing this budget. The key priority for Mayor Jenkins, number one, was public safety. These are some key highlighted items related to the budget that relates to public safety. The budget contains 3 police academies in each of the first and second fiscal years. It contains 1 fire academy in each year. It budgets for a number of 678 sworn police officers in each fiscal year, $33.6 and $38.2 million of overtime, respectively, for sworn and civilian officers in OPD. It contemplates a multi-year strategy to meet the minimum staffing number under Measure NN, which is 700. Budget funds 24 of the 25 fire engine companies across the city, which is 2 more than were operating at the time it was proposed, and funds all of our fire truck companies. The budget does contain significant increases and investments in violence prevention, particularly our ceasefire program. How do we address this budget shortfall? When we began this process, we had a roughly $140 million structural deficit. Sean can do a little bit about what that means. Structural deficit means you have a deficit that you cannot plug with a one-time solution. You have to make sure you have an ongoing solution to balance it. We balance that with a number of mechanisms. First, thank you voters. Measure A sales tax, which was approved, contributed to $22 million to closing that gap. There's another roughly $8 million in revenue solutions proposed in the budget. There were over $60 million in reductions in contracts and O&M across departments in the city. Another $19 million in reduced personnel. We'll get to that more later at the back end of our presentation. We waived again our maintenance of effort requirements under our locally approved ballot measures that contributed about $60 million to the effort. There's one fire engine browned out, and there was about a $5 million reduction in rent service costs. The collective amount of all these together is the mechanism by which we were able to balance that total deficit number. I should have said earlier, this presentation, if you're struggling to look at it, is on our budget website. Sean will have a link of it up on the screen in the bed. So if this is too much, you need to look at it again. It is online on the website. We should note that after this budget is balanced, even though that this is a structural balance, we are doing ongoing solutions for ongoing problems. We'll have things that may reopen our hole, and we'll get into detail more than later, but things like the rising cost of CalPERS, healthcare, cost of living, and uncertainty around the federal government and economic circumstances could cause this deficit to reopen beyond the future of this 2 years. High-level our budget overview. Your general purpose fund, which is unrestricted funding that Sean talked about earlier, is $780 million proposed. Total budget in the first year is $2.165 billion. The majority of those funds, as you can see, are restricted funding sources that have dedicated uses as to how they must be spent. I'll note that that general fund 7088 number is $19.5 million lower than the budget we started this fiscal year with. So when we were almost 11 months ago, beginning to operate this fiscal year, this budget we're proposing is $19.5 million lower than that number. And we've had cost increases, we've had cost escalation at times, so the impact is not just $19 million, it's more than that, because things are more expensive now than they were then. Although it's actually $26 million lower than what we actually spent the year before. So year over year, this is a reduced number, and that shows up in terms of what we're able to provide in terms of resources. I'm going to turn it over to the city administrator to walk you through some slides on core services.
Good evening. So one of the key aspects of this particular budget is really honing in on what are the core services that we as a local government are to provide. So one aspect that I want to make sure that we are highlighting and frankly acknowledging, there are significant enhancements with respect to the services we're providing. We're trying to, at the very least, maintain some level of service so that we can certainly continue to push the envelope with where we are as we work to build over time. And once the council has an opportunity to really delve into the budget going into this year, we're certainly excited about really trying to see where we can enhance services going forward. One of the key elements I want to highlight is also just the maintenance of city infrastructure and parks, recognizing that certainly that's a key service that we provide that's important to many of our communities, especially here in the district. So you want to maintain that some level of service. So there's a lot of conversation with respect to who provides maintenance of our parks. Right now, it sits in Public Works. There's an argument to be made that it probably should rest within the Parks and Recreation Department. This is actually an area that I've seen in other jurisdictions. So it's certainly something that we want to explore going forward, and perhaps as a part of this budget. Again, continuing on the theme of homelessness and housing solutions, the streamlining and the development services like permitting and inspections. Some of you all may know that the city of Oakland has a permitting ombudsman. So there's been a lot of work that's been going on for the last couple of years, at least prior to my arrival, from a permitting perspective. I think now we're in a place where we really want to start to see some of the fruits of our labor with the implementation of some of the actions and activities from a permitting standpoint. And we certainly acknowledge the reality that there has to be some sense of customer service when folks visit the permit county, not just as a resident, as well as our business community. So we're looking at enhancing our hours and really getting back to the basics of when are the doors open? Well, quite frankly, they should be open. Contractors get to work because we are certainly have an obligation to our community to make sure we meet their expectations. And also, I want to acknowledge you have the only thing. you for joining us this evening. And this has certainly been a hot priority and topic for her and administration going forward. Also continuing support for community services such as parks and libraries. Continuing down the theme of core service delivery, so specifically around current key investments to address problems of dirty streets and public spaces. One thing that we also will acknowledge is the fact that while our public works crews across the city have been really honed in holistically on trying to address the issue day after day after day, as soon as we pick it up, somebody comes back behind us and puts it down. So that's a key acknowledgement. One thing that we are exploring now, and we hope to actually launch in the next month and a half or so, is really piloting something that we've done in the past, which is actually having a zone-based delivery model where, as opposed to a complaint-driven model. And what I mean by that, many of you all have used our 311 service. There's a lot of success and some frustration. Folks feel as if we're not being heard. But even though we may have that 311 system, which is really important, I want to say maybe 2017, 18, when that was sort of, as I understand it, the approach that was our focus. Now it's time for us to get back to a structure where you have the opportunity to say, look, we are in a zone as a public works crew. If we see trash, we pick it up. We see illegal dumping, we pick it up, as opposed to us solely looking at what are the service requests. So the frustration lies with our community. Why are we driving past trash? Get to another location when we see it. So this comes at the recommendation of our frontline staff that are in the field every single day, so they see and know exactly what it is that needs to be done. So I'm excited about the vision, our leadership, and the willingness to push the envelope and do something different going forward. In addition, around the environmental enforcement officers, the enforcement piece is certainly critical. So there are some investments with enhancing and maintaining levels of service with our environmental enforcement officers. Candidly, there's a need for more support there. And so hopefully we can get to a space as we get deeper to the budget year, as we realize additional cost savings across the city, that we can shore up our environmental enforcement officer crews. One topic of discussion that seemed to be a lot of excitement about, and Councilmember Ramachandran, thank you so much for your advocacy and making sure that we move forward with our bonds. Going forward, $180 million of affordable housing investments over 2 years and $50 million per year over the next 2 years for paving and our public infrastructure work. And we know that's been a critical point of emphasis. One of the key aspects on a bit last year, we did not go to the bond market. It's certainly no secret of the fact that we're trying to solve a significant budget deficit on last year. However, going into this year, one of the key milestones that we have to hit is the adoption of a balanced budget. So I'm really excited about the transparency and the process that we've gone through, because it allows us to have these conversations sooner than we had perhaps in prior years. But hopefully we can certainly move forward with the adoption of the budget if everything's really tight and packaged. We're going to get feedback from the community on what we want to see and what changes we may want to see a little bit earlier. But the adoption of a balanced budget is one of the most critical elements of us moving forward with the bond process. And while I'm aggressively push the staff with respect to trying to get to the bond market in October, which is a realistic time frame that our financial advisors who handle this process for us externally, they say that's fairly aggressive, but realistically it'll be deeper in the year, closer to November, but certainly before the end of the fiscal year, which is the time frame that we would anticipate in prior years. So on the delivery core service on community services, so continued current funding and operations of parks and recreation, summer and after school programs. I know for a fact that we heard the community loud and clear with respect to making sure that we maintain our investments and keeping our summer camps and after school programs going. But the other part of that, and that is certainly will be maintained in this budget. One of the other important aspects that I want to make sure I highlight is the commitment from the philanthropic community to help support the needs of our summer camp and town camp, specifically on the meals that we provide. The East Bay Community Foundation has stepped up in a mighty way, as well as the Alameda County Food Bank and Eat, Learn, Play. They've stepped up in a mighty way to the clip of about $370,000 investment to make sure that our families that are in need can have a solid meal and snacks during the summer. So I just want to publicly thank them for their contribution, because that's certainly something that went a long way. I see my time is running. And also, I want to take out, where's Lenore? Thank you, Lenore, thank you. One of the things that was really tough for us on last year is having to make some adjustments and decisions around the hours of our senior centers. And the reason I call you out, I just want to say thank you for just offering up and giving us solutions on how do we address the issue based on the needs of those that are and the users of the services. I want to say thank you. We heard you all loud and clear. We certainly want to continue moving in the direction. So thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So as it stands right now, the services will be maintained. However, there's an adjustment in the number of hours and days, but we certainly want to get to a place where we are enhancing those hours back to a level Monday through Friday with full services the whole day. All right, and lastly, if I'm looking at 1 minute, so I'll certainly head up. There's a lot of conversation around Head Start. Funding for Head Start is maintained in this budget, to be very, very clear and very explicit. There is a lot of conversation on what does that look like going forward. We all, I shouldn't assume, there's a lot of conversation at the federal level on what's happening to Head Start. So the narratives have been changing quite a bit. But we are in a place where we recognize the fact that all of our Head Start, the vast majority of our Head Start funding does come from the federal government. And when the news broke earlier, maybe 2 months ago, about Head Start being at risk, our staff jumped into action, trying to get an understanding of what's happening, because that's a significant funding source for us to make sure we can maintain those service levels. We saw in San Francisco where the Region 9 Head Start office was closed. We've seen this all across the country, but I want to be very clear. Funding for Head Start is maintained in this budget. So I want to make that very, very, very clear. And finally, the only other thing I'll certainly add here, we're at time. The only thing I'll just add here is the recognition that the arts and cultural affairs are certainly an important element here in the city of Oakland, and the philanthropic community has approached the city about wanting to maintain some level of investment at a far greater level than we currently have right now. So I will stop right now. Apologize for going over time. If not, I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks. We'll keep moving quickly through this budget presentation. So there are some impacts that are notable to our workforce as a result of this budget. It does reduce more than 400 positions across the city, and these positions would otherwise be providing services to us as Oaklanders. Of these positions, about 85 were frozen in the budget already, so there's no impact to those. They were already not funded in the current year. 240 were funded the current year, but are currently vacant, and that's part due to the hiring freeze that we put in place in order to try to balance the current year deficit. 80 positions were estimated to be filled at that time, though we expect no more than a dozen people to suffer from reductions in the rate or reduction in force through this process. I'll note that this is all in the context of very, very large economic challenges and economic pressures due to rising pension costs, healthcare inflation, but I will note the federal level is probably most pressing here. We're now back on tariffs are on pause. When I gave this presentation in District 2 last night, when I started the presentation, we had tariffs rolling across the economy. Now there are none. They're back again. See, this right. None of us can predict what's going on in the market. I'm going to say this joke again. You know, my background is econometrics. I would normally nerd out on you as to how the economy would be driven and all the data you could use to figure it out. If it was just a political issue, you know, I would lean on our mayor here and say, you know, what do your connections in Washington say about what's going to go on? I actually think maybe you have a background in psychology. It might be really helpful to understanding what's going on, because Lord knows I can't figure it out. Suffice to say, this is a real risk for us. We're a port town. And so specifically the trade elements are really potentially a risk to our local economy. We don't know what their impacts are going to be. We don't know if interest rates are going to go up, the housing market. What it means is we have to be dynamic, flexible, and nimble through this entire process, because this uncertainty exists outside of us. Sean mentioned this earlier, we do have long-run financial challenges. So I get to nerd out with you all a little bit on some dynamics on high finance and pension obligations. This is a chart of our CalPERS obligations over the next several years. The orange bars up there are this thing called the UAL, unfunded accrued liability. It's your SAT word for the day. What this means is this is the amount we have to pay for people that are already retired. This blue line down here, this is your normal cost. This is your cost for pensions for people that are already working, that are still working. Different way of putting this, if the city closed down operations tomorrow, we still have to pay the orange bars. This is the kind of long run challenge, and this data, this is from CalPERS, you don't have to trust us on it, you go on the CalPERS website, pull it for us or any other local government in California. This is the kind of challenge in terms of increasing costs we're talking about. This is, I describe it as,
What is the red? Tell you how much is?
the red is telling you what the amount is, telling you the amount that you have to pay for people that are already retired. The blue is the amount required to put aside for pension specifically for people that are active. Even if I get through it, because we can definitely get some more questions later, I can definitely talk about this. Suffice to say, this is a major long-term cost. I could show you healthcare, I could show you retiree medical, the charts would look similar, right? It's the same kind of dynamic. I describe it as your rent is going up faster than your income. And that's why you continue to be forced to make hard choices as a household. That's the dynamic we're in. This budget is about, just, do you mind if I wrap all the way through it? Sure. This budget does contemplate a mid-term financial plan and roadmap to fiscal health, which involves addressing the pension issue I just met, obtaining reliable service delivery, maintaining access to the capital markets we talked about earlier, super important. Returning to compliance with our adopted ballot measures, that's super important. We've been waiving our maintenance of effort on local measures as of late. We need a plan to come back in compliance with all of those. The budget does not rely significantly on one-time revenue, unlike the prior cycle, and it does include a new parcel tax contemplated for year 2 as a part of this plan. This roadmap has to get us toward long-term structural balance, and this is going to be a multi-year process for us to do. We have to bend curves, we have to do some very specific things, again, to stabilize the city's finances, diversify our revenue, and implement fiscal reforms. I'll finish this out by noting some transparency items that are in this budget. It, for the first time in many years, contains a full list of all contracts, grants, or planned contracts and grants that are funded in the operating budget, literally item by item. You can actually go look at them. You can figure out what we're planning to spend on every contract item. That is a huge effort we went through to try to be more transparent in this budget so everyone is aware of what we're planning and what we're funding. It includes funding for performance high-risk contracts and grants. Making sure we're doing what we can with what we have is critically important. So this is also part of our process here of making sure our performance and our performance for what we're given and what we're using is tight, making sure we're clear on what it's being used for. This transparency, and I'll say, you can go online and look at our budget book, it's interactive, you can translate it to multiple languages, you can pull data, you can share it, you can post it to social media, it's designed to be played with. And behind it, there's an open data portal that gives you literally access to all the raw data on this. So I encourage you to go online. We're all about transparency here, so we work together to try to resolve this problem. I'm gonna pause there, and I think I'm handing it back to Sean for Q&A. Nope, I'm handing it back to the councilmember for Q&A. The mayor, mayor wants to say something, there we go.
We're requesting.
Thank you very much. Good evening. Let me first thank our staff. They've done a phenomenal job, and our council member, of course, for pulling us all together this evening, because this is a defining moment, I think, in the Oakland's history, but also in terms of our budget process. And so the fact that you are engaged in this so early, and it is early in terms of the council, because the council will be, of course, looking at the budget and making amendments. But I'm glad that I'm able to listen and to be here with you. Just a couple of things I wanted, again, knowing the challenges that we have here in terms of our deficit and in terms of the fact that I believe that the budget with the interim mayor and myself and others, I did weigh in on the budget, that they did a phenomenal job in terms of balancing and in terms of addressing the deficit, knowing that we still have a long-term deficit and structural deficit that we have to address. But specific, and I was on the Appropriations Committee for many years in Congress and the Budget Committee and a foreign business owner. And I know that to balance the budget, we have to either cut expenses, or you do both, cut expenses, raise revenue to get to a balanced budget. So we've been looking at both and how to do both. And I think they've done a very good job. And we have to look to the future also and use this as the base for the future budget difficulties that we're still going to face, as you know. But I focused also on the public safety piece. I don't know if you've talked about Measure NN, but I know that, the entire city is concerned about public safety, and voters passed Measure NN in November, which required us to get to 700 police officers. Also, it's $47 million. I believe 75% of that goes to our nonprofits. And it's a comprehensive approach to public safety, which includes violence prevention, ceasefire, addressing human trafficking, and trying to get us to 700 police officers. And of course, looking at efficiencies in every department, including the police department, as it relates to overtime and where we can have more accountability and more transparency. I think we've begun that process in this budget, at least more so than what I've seen in the past. And so, as we go through this, I look forward to all of the input from our residents here, taxpayers, people who deserve their, city to work for them. And specifically, I'm very focused on core services and constituent services and how we can better deliver, city services for the public. And that's extremely important. I'm a professional social worker, and I do believe that, we have to make our city government work. And when you have a difficult issue, a problem with the city permitting, housing, encampments, policies, whatever it is, the city needs to be responsive to. And so within this process, we're looking at how to make sure that we begin a process of resetting where we need to reset, the ability to deliver core services. So thank you all again. It's really good to see everybody.
Hello, everybody. Hello, 1, 2, hello, there we go. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jared Savas from Councilmember Ramachandran's office, and I'm going to be facilitating our Q&A this evening. We received a lot of questions in advance of this meeting, so thank you for everyone that submitted those questions. Thank you to everyone that submitted questions during the meeting. We have tried to consolidate them down because we've got a lot of, obviously, you can imagine, repeat questions, so we're going to consolidate them down as best we can just to cover a broad range of topics that are clearly of the most interest to all of you. The first question I'm going to ask is going to be directed to the council member, which is how do you work with other council members to respond to the mayor's proposal, budget proposal under this tight timeline? And what areas of agreement and disagreement do you anticipate from your peers on the council?
Absolutely, that's a great question. So like I said, I'm co-chairing the budget team, with Councilmember Brown. And the budget team also includes Councilmember Unger and, the new Councilmember, Charlene Wang. We have been at work the day the budget was released. If you've seen the actual physical budget book, it is this big fat thing that we have all sifted through extensively. Our staff have sifted through extensively. We have peppered the finance department with hundreds of questions at this point, and we are really trying to figure out, and one core thing that unites all of us is, where can we find the pennies under the cushion covers? Where's the last bit of funding that we can use? Because the proposed budget does a really good job of starting the process of doing as much as we can to find that revenue. We're trying to squeeze just a little more out of the city while staying true to our need to be fiscally responsible. That's another theme that I think defines what my budget team is interested in. And this is why I'm looking forward to this process. The starting point was already, like our Budget Advisory Commission said, a significantly more honest and transparent process, a refreshing one than last year. And then now the budget team has another set of very critical eyes and are doing everything we can to come up with a consensus of at least 5 council members to pass the budget. And I do believe we have enough shared values on this current council that we can make that happen.
The remaining questions, can you all hear me okay?
No.
I think it's pause, sorry. The remaining questions, I'm going to be directing mostly to the city administrator and Bradley, so whoever, whichever of you wants to answer is totally fine. Going to go in order of kind of themes here. The first being just general budget balancing and our structural deficit. So we got a lot of questions about what is the plan for addressing our long-term structural deficit, and is the city making the cuts in this budget that are necessary to have a truly balanced budget?
Thank you for the question, and so we'll kind of tag team this bit. So realistically, the decisions to make the reduction started last December. Last December, December 17th, as some of y'all may recall, there was a council meeting where I had to make several tough budget reductions and recommendations to council. I'm just grateful for council for their leadership in affirming some of the decisions that were made. Now, there were some adjustments specifically around the fire stations with Councilmember Ramachandran to make sure that we got those all the stations back open. But other than that, there were some tough decisions that were made back in December. Now, going forward, one of the key things that the council also said, hey, look, we really need for the administration to come back with a plan to address the budget deficit. I think one of the things that we also recognize is what our staff capacity actually is in working on the budget. So what we end up doing is actually engage the services of two financial experts that are helping support us on both sides of the ledger, on the revenue side, as well as on what is the long range plan for us to get out of this deficit. Now, one of the things that, as a part of this budget, over the next couple of weeks, we'll have a formal presentation on a roadmap to financial health. We hired the services of Ben Rosenfeld, who was a former controller of the city of San Francisco, as well as some of my internal staff that have been really working holistically to really map out the plan in and of itself. So I'm very excited to bring that to council. I have respect for the council and the process. I want to make sure I get that to them first, get their reactions and feedback, and that will be rolled out more broadly to the community. But there are several key steps and actions that will be forthcoming. In addition, I want to make sure that we honor the work I mentioned this morning to Mike, that we give the Budget Advisory Committee a preview of that as well. So I think your input and the constituents y'all represent is really, really important. So a lot of the work will be forthcoming, but to answer the first part of that question is the fact that we actually started that budget, the reductions last December. And again, it's making decisions on both sides of the ledger. But I, again, want to acknowledge and appreciate the leadership from the council going back to December of last year.
And I guess just as a quick follow-up to that question as well, we had a lot of people asking about the imbalance between revenues and expenditures. And I guess just a little more on how this budget might start to bridge that gap.
So key elements of this budget, one, we're being as aggressive as possible in terms of collection of revenues. And two, the budget does identify two additional revenue sources on one is past Measure A, and the other is a contemplated partial tax. As we are doing that, and this is really important, we have to look at both sides of the ledger. It also contains significant mechanisms for cost containment and expenditure on the other side of the ledger. And so those are most explicitly done through the reductions in contracts and positions that you see noted there, but there are a number of other internal expenditure control processes that we are going through to ensure that we are tightly budgeting what our resources are. And so this is going to be, as the city administrator just said, an ongoing process. We have taken a giant chunk out of this structural deficit. However, we know that there are pressures that may cause it to reopen in the future, and we know that this budget is not sufficient to deliver the level of services that we all deserve as Oaklanders. So this is a part of a process where we're moving forward with both the focus on public safety and core services and holding that in balance with fiscal stability and structural balancing in the long term. And so that balancing process is an ongoing effort that we're going to have to tackle.
We received I'm sorry, do you want to say more? Sorry.
I do. So one of the things I want to make sure that we call out explicitly to that very, to Brad's answer, as an example, when we talk about the revenue side of the ledger, one of the things that we are very sensitive to and came up today during the Budget Advisory Committee during their presentation is making sure we're not overstating our revenues as a balancing or budget trick. That's something we were very, very sensitive to. One should be highlighted key actions as an equal that you had before. So we made a very concerted effort to make sure we are ramping up our parking enforcement officers so that we can. It is not just about revenue collection. It's also creating order within our community. So that's one example on how we're trying to make sure that if there is an increase in the revenue projection, what are we doing to make sure that we can realistically handle that? So that's one example I wanted to make sure that we highlight. I know there are also actions specifically in the revenue division under the leadership of Director Roseman, specifically even how we bill for certain revenue categories. Even sending paper notices out to folks that owe the city. And here's the reason why something like that is so important. It makes a lot of sense to me when I understood why we were doing it. There's electronic noticing that had gone out. Many folks may not even, it may go to spam, it may go wherever, or if I see something saying you owe or you have to pay, I'm not paying that. But I will say that at the end of the day, having that paper notification process, which seems and is very formal, is something that I want to make sure that I give that example so that you all understand what we're doing to try to make sure we can have good revenue. So I probably.
No, you're fine. I'm gonna move us along to a couple questions about the 2026 parcel tax proposal that's part of the interim mayor's budget. And I get just two quick questions on that. First is, why is this tax being considered, especially after the passage of Measure A, and is another parcel tax equitable to the citizens of Oakland?
So I would say two elements to that. We are unlikely, and this is where the council member, the mayor, the city manager currently do this before. We're in a really hard situation as an organization. There is actually not an easy way out of it. It does not exist. And we have to operate honestly, painfully at both sides of the ledger. We do think that we can actually, and we have a strategy on that proposed partial tax. I'm not getting too detailed into it right now, but to do some offsets to other taxing spaces in the organization where we think we'll be able to alleviate a lot of that pressure on homeowners specifically in terms of the impact of that $40 million parcel tax that's being considered. It is still a proposal, but we have to look at the revenue side of the ledger as well as the expenditure side of the ledger. Candidly, as we've talked before, I've used the example of the rent is growing faster than the income. Part of that is cutting back on your expenditures at home. And part of that is, more nights at work and some more overtime work and some extra hours, which translates in this analogy to us asking you all to give us that grace to have additional resources to try to maintain this. The long-term structural balance is going to involve all of the above options, and it has to, if we're actually going to successfully balance and provide services that we are honestly, we are owed as Oaklanders.
And one quick follow-up, just on the parcel tax as well. If the budget is passed with the parcel tax included in it, and the parcel tax does not pass in the election, what is the contingency plan and how will the city prioritize expenditures in the event that happens?
I assume the prioritization, and I'll defer to our policymakers on that in terms of their policy guidance for us on prioritization, but I assume it will likely be a core safety and public safety first space, because that's what I've heard from almost the entirety of the council and the mayor as we've been talking about this. The parcel tax is not included until year 2 of this budget, so we have time before we would adopt that second year budget to do a correction in advance with knowledge of its passage or failure. So it is not a space where we're assuming something, spending it before we actually get it. It's in year 2 explicitly because we will know about its passage or failure prior to having to make the fiscal plan for the coming year. So it gives us a momentary window to make those corrections should they be needed.
Moving us along to a few questions about public safety, because we received a great number of questions on that topic. How will the budget ensure that fire stations, including the ones that just reopened, remain open, and what can be done to ensure this happens?
Well, simply put, what I appreciate is the fact that the budget does afford us opportunity to open stations. And now there is one proposed brownout in this particular budget. And so as the council moves forward with the deliberation and their process, the decisions will be made if that one brownout is not amenable to being as a whole. So I can only speak to what's budgeted, and it's assumed that all of the all but one station will be open.
We had a number of questions about the number of OPD officers. So I'll just ask, can the number of OPD officers and police academies increase in this budget? Or will it take longer to achieve those goals?
So realistically, it'll take a bit longer to achieve those goals, in large part because of the rate of attrition of our officers in the department. We're attritioning about on average, 4 or 5 officers per month leaving the department. An academy typically, Chief Mitchell has indicated, we're trying to get to about 30, maybe 32, 33 officers per academy. But at the end of the academy, we usually net about 20 officers or so. The reality is, once the officers graduate from the academy, they still have their field training officers. So we're talking about a year before an officer is on the street. That one trained officer, by the time they get to hit the street, you've lost a significant number of officers to backfill. And so aggressively, I think that's part of the reason why in this particular budget, the 3 academies, to make sure that we can have some semblance of maintenance of effort to make sure that we can have the number of officers required to hit that 678 number. But like the chief always articulates, it's just a reality, no matter how much money we necessarily have, it just takes a lot of time to get those officers through the academy and getting them on the street. It's also, the other piece of that is not just the academy, but it's also the equipment costs and all the ancillary services that we have to make sure we are accounting for. Specifically, we buy new vehicles, that's what we have to outfit them. So it's not, so I think that's the other element that we have to be mindful of when we talk about public. There's also the infrastructure to support it.
We had a number of questions about OPD overtime. So I'll just ask, what is being done to reduce overspending on police overtime? And why can't the police department hire more staff with that overtime money rather than spending it on overtime?
So I think there's an importance to have overtime in the police department. One of the things that Chief Mitchell has done, and I'm really grateful, back in December of last year, I sent the chief a memo. He and I had a conversation about the need that they got to cut their overtime budget about $25 million. Based on our last Q3 report, we're trending in that direction, so I'm very excited about that. I can't sit here and tell you that we have some technological solution that we can make sure that we are controlling those expenses on the overtime side. What I will tell you is that you have outstanding leadership at the helm of the department. One of the challenges in a lot of communities that we see, specifically with messaging and communication in a paramilitary environment, is the fact that the head of that organization and the command, it's important to make sure that the directives that are given in this paramilitary environment, and as someone that has worn a uniform, it is critical to make sure that that information loop is absolutely closed. What has not happened in the past, and it's certainly it's not a criticism, is the fact what comes from the head does not make it to the sergeant's level. And so those sergeants that are actually controlling the staffing levels and the approvals is not making it down. But Chief Mitchell has done an excellent job in making sure the level of communication of what my expectations are, what the mayor's expectations are, what we hear from council is trickled down into the front line level, specifically around how we communicate from the sergeants. And a lot of conversation recently is around shift extension, and there's a lot of conversation there. And so that, I think that's the space where we sort of see a lot of expenditures in overtime, but there has been an impact with respect to our special details that we see, whether it be our helicopter unit, whether it be some of our sideshow details, but this budget, with that overtime money, a lot of that work is done on overtime. And so there's an important element that we see. So I think the question, if you ask the chief, would he rather have the bodies or the overtime? Well, he'll probably say, I want the bodies, but there's a reality of the fact that we cannot hire enough officers in the amount of time that we need based on the rate of attrition. It's just our reality, so.
I'm gonna move us along to some question, or maybe just one question about businesses and economic incentives. So we had a question, what is in the budget that will encourage economic development, revenue and investment in Oakland, and more of a business-friendly environment, particularly with regards to small businesses in Oakland?
So I will say, I'm elated to have in the budget our community ambassador program. Councilmember Ramachandran has made a big push, and she made it real clear to me that's an expectation. So I really appreciate, and she's been very consistent. Was what I always appreciate. So I think that's one element that we want to make sure that we are doing, what we are doing to support our business needs, specifically around the area of safety. There's also a big push from Councilmember Ramachandran, President Jenkins, on really a holistic approach to economic development. Our economic and workforce development team, they're putting together an economic development framework that will be forthcoming in the next couple of months with key action items from that. If you all recall from the council members' press conference not too long ago, that was highlighted at that point in time. So that was the first public statement about it. And so there'll be more to come in the next couple of months about how we actually retain and attract business. The other piece of that, I will say, on our side, we have to make sure that we are evolving to a place where we're more business friendly, people in the office, making sure that our office hours are such that we're not just bankers' hours, we just have that opportunity to make sure that we are supporting our businesses as best as possible. Our economic and workforce development framework that will be forthcoming in the next couple of months will answer a lot of those questions for us.
And just as a quick follow-up and tying back public safety back into this, we had a lot of questions about, with regards to there being a lot of crimes against small businesses. What is there anything in the budget that helps to protect them better going forward?
That's a great question, and candidly, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything specifically, but if there's something more that we can communicate to the council member and share with the folks here, we can certainly answer that, but there's nothing that comes to the top of mind right now.
Another big priority from our residents who submitted questions was paving and Measure U. So I'm just trying to consolidate many questions into one here, but with the city being behind on the 5-year paving plan at this point, can the budget first off do anything to facilitate paving and potholes? And if not, when, I know you already talked about Measure U a little bit, but just, I guess, just to expand on that a little bit as about when Measure U and Measure U bond sales can actually happen.
Sure, so as we get later into the year, we'll Measure U dollars, we go through the bonding process, so when the funding becomes available, we'll certainly have a pretty aggressive approach. As we all know, the paving season is, quite frankly, really March to November, sometimes we get in December or so. But once that rainy season really hits, we really don't see a whole lot of paving. One thing I will tell you, under the leadership of Director Rowan, he's really pushing our teams to try to see how can we actually have our own internal paving crews at a much larger scale to make sure we are capitalizing on the resources that we currently have. There is an investment that will be required for equipment, but having that in-house support, we can move it can be done cheaper, and we can move a lot faster. For those that have visited some of the Ballers games, if you see the infrastructure around it, that's all of our internal paving staff that did that. But we want to expand that to scale. Now, we do contract a lot of our work out. Some of the larger paving companies in the area, we do a lot of our work. But we certainly want to get to a space where perhaps we bifurcate the work in such a way that the larger paving crews that can move at a much greater speed can handle our larger and longer corridors, whereas we handle a lot of our collector and arterial roads so that we can see a lot. I was actually turning my car around and almost broke my axle on the road just behind here, so I think we certainly want to move forward in such a way that we can expedite.
And just as a quick follow-up, because we were asked this a couple times too, does it make any sense, and is there an effort, and do you think there could be an effort in the future to change the city charter to allow the budget to actually fund paving as opposed to be through a bond process?
Well, I won't speak to that. I won't speak to on behalf of our elected leaders and whether that is something they want to explore. So I guess I'll kind of observe.
Okay.
Open to exploring, for sure.
I'm just going to ask a question about city personnel and layoffs. And I guess if you could just speak a little bit about this, with this budget proposal, are there layoffs on the city side that are expected in this budget? And does the budget do anything to kind of curtail high spending on employees?
So as I noted, there's 400 positions that are reduced in this budget. The process for actually, we just went through this internally for the summer cuts. The process for determining whether and how someone may or may not be laid off is actually pretty complicated. It doesn't actually just exist with us in the finance department. We're required to go through our HR, we actually have to go through every employee's file and determine seniority and ordering. It's a pretty complicated process. Our initial estimate, based on the data we do have, is we're gonna have less than a dozen people who would be suffering either reduction in rank or loss of employment. We're obviously trying to get that down. The errata adjustment to the budget does provide funding that could be potentially used to mitigate some of those efforts, but it is a possibility when we're looking at reductions of services. It's not particularly gonna be a large number, most likely, but that is still an possibility. And then what was your second question around? The second component was around,
Just the high spending on, employees, if the budget doesn't need to curtail that, or if that's something that can be looked at.
so I'll note that personnel costs are high. And the reason personnel costs are high is that chart I showed you earlier, right? Our benefit rates for some of our sworn employees are approaching 90 cents on the dollar. Right, that's real. That's a real cost that we're bearing, partly in terms of the long-term costs that I showed you earlier. That's not something we can necessarily move away from in terms of there's no real mitigation to that in the short run. I'll note that any things related to employee compensation are properly done at the bargaining table, so there's very little that we can say up here about what that process looks like, because it's a sort of a sacrosanct process about how it goes about. But I'll note that that is a major cost pressure for us, and a huge element of the costs are not actually necessarily what employees are taking home in terms of pay, but this benefit cost that in large part is due to already retired persons and the need to fund that sort of long-term liability.
In the process of pouring through this budget and trying to be creative about what we can do, one example of the direction council is, what our budget team is trying to give to the administration, is rethinking salary classifications. Right now, there's a practice in Oakland, not in other cities, not in most other cities, where employees will come in at the highest step. If there's 5 salary steps, it'll often be the highest. That means there's less room for growth in salary within the position and other things. If we move that down to somewhere in the middle, with the assumption that maybe most employees will start at new employees will start at the beginning or middle, then that produces some salary savings, as an example. Another thing that is key to our budget team's priorities, and something commonly that I believe frankly all council members do believe as well, is the need for more ground level staff. Boots on the ground, the street sweepers, the sign replacers, the things that make our city go around, the permanent desk folks, all the basic service level staff, and fewer suits at the top, for lack of a better word. We're trying to see what we can do to reduce some of the, well-paid, frankly, high-level positions, when some of those positions can fund a few entry-level workers, which, not only helps the city run, but also provides jobs to owners. There's a number of job classifications that have not appeared on our city website, and I can talk about our hiring struggles in another town hall. But there are a number of positions that are entry-level, that don't require advanced degrees, that could be going to qualified Oaklanders, that could be going to our reentry population, that could be going to young people trying to search for well-paying jobs in living wage jobs, let me phrase it that way, not necessarily well-paying in the city, and that is one of the values that we are putting forward. More people on the ground delivering core services, fewer expensive suits at the top.
Good.
We have about 10 minutes remaining in this Q&A, so I'm just gonna kind of bank through as many of these as I can in that period of time. We had a number of questions about homelessness and illegal dumping. So I guess I'll just ask broadly, how does the budget address blight, illegal dumping, encampments, in a way that will, I guess, be humane, but also in a way that will attract businesses, middle-class residents to Oakland, and just generally, improve quality of life from both visual and realistic standpoint.
So I'll note that there are, in terms of the budget proposal itself, there is the continued funding of our environmental enforcement officers program. This is a part of the effort, and city administrator mentioned earlier, moving from a complaint based to a zone based system for illegal dumping. but environmental enforcement officers and actually enforcing against illegal dumping actions is a key element of our strategy to prevent dumping from happening in the first place. There's a lot of work being done by Public Works around citing illegal haulers and other activities to try to stop the dumping problem as opposed to just picking it up. Although around homelessness, budget does contain significant funding for services related to homelessness and camping cleanup and whatnot. But I will note we are not the only local government that serves Oaklanders. Alameda County is a major entity, major local government entity, and Alameda County has recently is going to be putting in place a significant amount of resources specifically targeted to homelessness. And this came up with budget advisory. I think that, yeah, 58% of the homeless population in the county. In order to properly function as local government, the city's core capacities of public safety, cleanup, sanitation, maintaining control of our right of ways are really important and need to be partnered with the county's key responsibilities around social services, health services, mental services that are their core capacity under the state constitution. And so we need a partnership with them, employing resources that definitely exist right now to make sure that we're addressing things holistically, because if they're stepping in their space and we're doubling our efforts in our space, we can move the needle.
I want to just ask quickly about budget transparency, as that was a big topic for a lot of people. So this is working. There we go. Budget transparency, in case no one heard me. What is the process for ensuring that this budget is transparent to the public, both throughout this process and then once it has passed, to make sure it's maintaining the goals set therein?
So I'll say this, I've been with the city since I started as an intern in 2010. Transparency is an ongoing concern that we have as an organization. I'm not gonna lie to you, budgets of a $2 billion corporation are complicated, right? I can talk to you about how many special funds we have, like it is complicated. And it's not ever going to sort of make blunt, easy sense to anyone that's not immersed into it. That's just the ground rule. You wouldn't want, your doctor to only operate at the level of you or I walking off the street, right? There's a level of expertise. At the same time, you as a patient deserve an explanation of what's happening with you in your body. And so what we're trying to do as best we can is explain through these and other processes, whatever we can in the best way possible. You guys can let us know if we're doing a good job or not doing a good job with that. So we're trying to put analogies, a way of talking about it. Our budget site is a key element of this. It is all the data that drives our budget is available. We are doing more and more and more to publish detail and key information behind it so that you have access to the key elements of it. Again, that is more complexity, but we also provide you with the same document narrative summaries of what's going on. So our approach has been do it multiple ways. Multiple different approaches to try to get the information across, multiple different check-in points. We do have routine updates on city revenues and expenditures through our revenue expenditure reports. They come 3 times a year. There are check-in points naturally. I encourage you all as residents to tune in, to stay engaged. It's complicated, but if you stay with it does start to make sense eventually. And if we're failing at communicating that, let us know and we will redouble those efforts for you.
I try on my social media and newsletter platforms to break down information that's easily digestible. If there are suggestions of budget related topics you want me to talk about in my 9-second videos, that's easy to understand, please send them my way, DMs, emails, whatever it is. We are very open to hearing your ideas and what clarity you want. I try to post more and more information about the budget and other hot topics going on in the city, but I'm very open to feedback on what you want to hear. And if you're not signed up for my newsletter, there's QR codes in the back that you can sign up on. And I'm at Janani for Oakland on all social media platforms, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. Not X.
And I appreciate that question. One thing I will highlight is the fact that the communication team here, and Sean and his team Karina, they're working effortlessly and really trying aggressively to identify other ways of communicating. I know it's a conversation that I've had with a couple of folks on the advisory committee. How can we do this better? But I can think the one thing that we have not done is ask our community, how can we communicate better? So we're certainly I just gotta say it, we're open to constructive feedback on how we can communicate better. You don't have all the answers. Some communities, they just have these town halls. Some will have the touch of budget process as a part of the budget process, which is a really interesting, unique approach. So my ask and almost an action item is if there are ways that we can communicate better, we'd love to hear, because we don't have all the answers for what works for everybody.
And just a quick shout out to one of my colleagues, Councilmember Ken Houston, who has arrived, representing District 7. And, obviously, I represent very proudly District 4, but one of the important things that goes back to the first question that's asked about how are you working with all council members is we are working cross districts on priorities. I have a set of very clear District 4 priorities, but I also have the entire city in mind because we are currently a council that communicates with each other. We talk about the experience from District 7, District 6, District 2, all of these things are being discussed among us on council. So even though, we're able to make sure that we're hearing this different perspectives when crafting our priorities and coming up with our proposals.
And I support you fully.
So, we have time for one more question, and I want to apologize, and we got dozens and dozens of questions. I can assure you, we've seen them all. They will all be looked at, they will all be answered, they'll all be considered. So if you didn't have your specific question answered, rest assured, we heard you, we received them, and they will be addressed, and we appreciate your engagement with this. But just the final question is that there was a lot of concern about the administration in DC and how potentially that could impact this budget. And I guess, are there any safeguards or contingencies built in or being discussed that could help to ameliorate those concerns?
So I'll start it out and then I'll let Brett certainly jump in. That is certainly, as I mentioned, the example we're talking about with Head Start. Year before last, we received about $123 million in federal dollars coming from the various funding sources from the feds. Last year, I think it was about 50 some odd million dollars, maybe a little bit more. That is a significant concern that frankly we all should have with respect to what's coming into the city of Oakland's coffers. I think as we really think about contingencies, it's not just a contingency if a ballot measure doesn't pass, but it's also a contingency that we're really trying to think through in the event we do not see any federal money coming or a complete scale back of federal money coming. Some of you all may have seen, wasn't released today. There's a list of sanctuary cities across the country that came from the Department of Homeland Security, and it lists by state, by city, by county. And so we have to be honest about the realities that may come our way, but we also, as long as we are getting into a place where we can really prepare for it, making sure our financial house is in order. One of the most important things is making sure that we follow our consolidated fiscal policies and make sure when we do have those opportunities for one-time revenue sources coming in, we are seeking our reserves going forward. The city of Irvine, I was just reading, the city of Irvine was able to sort of blunt some of the blowback from COVID because of the fact that they followed their process and followed policy to make sure that their reserves were really shored up. And so this is one of those practices that we have to have that fiscal discipline as a city. And I'm really appreciative of the fact that our council members, that's been at the forefront. Yes, we recognize there are services we have to provide, but one of the core things that we are obligated to do as a city, but if we have to divest from those services that, quite frankly, we're carrying other organizations' water, we can't do that anymore. But making sure our financial house is in order by making sure that we are seeding our various reserve accounts to make sure that we can actually really plan for a rainy day.
I just want to lift up the work that our council president, our mayor do regarding with our federal and state lobbyists to look for opportunities. There's also we have people in the city administrator's office. They're continually working on both grant opportunities and engagement with Washington and Sacramento. I know Councilmember Irene has had staff members at a lot of the budget town halls to hear in these spaces from you all. We're trying to work in partnership with our state and federal partners wherever possible to mitigate that. As it relates to things that might come out of the White House or out of Congress that impact us, we need to be prepared. We need to have our health in order, right? It's the same thing, right? If you're healthy and fit and you've been exercising and you eat well, you can better survive a health incident than if you were, eating junk food and being sedentary, right? You get your own health in order first, and then if you're in a better space to deal with and roll with the punch. So that's the key thing that we can do, and we have to monitor every day. It's a little nerve-wracking, looking, watching, monitoring, preparing, planning, and being ready to nimbly act, balance, be creative, to make sure we continue to provide whatever services we can.
So I've been told we actually are gonna ask one more question, and I'm going to, I think what I'm gonna do for this one is actually maybe put the two of you on the spot a little bit, and just ask you, what have we not touched upon in this Q&A that you feel is important that we could potentially communicate to our residents? What have you been hearing or heard at other town halls or anything of that nature that you feel is an important topic that we haven't touched upon tonight?
That's a great question.
I can also just ask a regular question if that doesn't work. Okay, we'll move on.
Comes to us, we'll let you know.
Then one question I will ask, we did receive a lot of questions about nonprofits, kind of on both sides, both in terms of supporting them and in terms of potentially scaling back funding for them. So I'm just, if you could maybe talk a little bit about what this budget kind of does in terms of, working with nonprofits going forward.
Sure, so I think that it's kind of twofold. There's the budget piece, and then there's the expectation from an administration and relationship management piece with our nonprofit partners. So from a budget perspective, what you'll see is a list of all the grants, contracts that we are disseminating from across the city. What do those funding sources sort of look like? Who's getting them? That sort of thing. I think the other aspect that has been something that I'm excited about us moving in this direction is really the accountability metric that says, hey, look, what are all the key performance indicators when the council gives the authority to execute an agreement or a contract with a nonprofit organization or some other entity for a service that has to be delivered? What should we expect as a city? If they aren't meeting those milestones or meeting those metrics, then what are we paying you for? So we have to be in a place to be able to terminate those agreements, and that those key performance indicators, and it's more than likely will have to be something on the front end once there is a resolution that is passed. Built into that resolution are those key performance indicators. Because at the end of the day, we have these year-over-year, one-year contract agreements, which are great from a monitoring perspective. But if you say, hey, look, your organization is not being held accountable, then candidly what ends up happening is show up at City Hall. And so you have that piece when folks show up at City Hall, but you have that push and pull, and you try to manage that relationship. And at the end of the day, on the front end, when the legislation, when it's passed, from the staff level, putting that in there, it's incumbent upon us to provide cover for council, because they adopt this thing. At the end of the day, we need to be in a place to hold them accountable. And so I'm excited about the fact that this conversation is on the table, and there are key action items that we have in place that we can certainly move in the right direction to make sure that we are supporting and having an accountability metric. One example, very quickly, I will say, the Department of Violence Prevention, when Dr. Joshi first stepped into the seat, I said Dr. Joshi got 32 contracts with nonprofit providers coming out of DVP. I don't know what organization, I guess with that same contracting process to execute that agreement for a $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 grant is the exact same process for issuing a $20 million grant for a construction project. The exact same process. So in my mind, how does that make sense? So there's a level of efficiency, there's an accountability piece. When Dr. Joshi stepped in, she went organization by organization by organization to really carve out what exactly are you all doing, what are you all providing, and some tough decisions were made. I see my time's at 0. Tough decisions were made to divest from those organizations that were not performing. And quite frankly, I have no sympathy when that happens, because at the end of the day, there's accountability piece that you all expect from us.
So that concludes our Q&A section for tonight. I just want to thank everyone who submitted questions both prior to the event and during the event. And I'm going to turn it over to Councilmember Ramachandran to conclude tonight.
Thank you everyone so much for showing up, for your thoughtful questions. Again, we received hundreds of questions ahead, so we tried our best to consolidate. If your question wasn't answered, please email our office, district4@oaklandca.gov, or any of my staff members individually, and we will reach out to the finance department and try our best to get you individual responses. Thank you to our amazing volunteers from SPUR, League of Women Voters, the Budget Advisory Commission, the City Administration I-Team and Communications Team, the Public Ethics Commission, our Planning and Building Department, and Montclair Presbyterian Church, and our District 4 Advisory Council. Everyone helped make this possible. Again, this presentation today was the interim mayor's proposed budget that was developed along with the administration. We are currently in the process of thinking through amendments. There are two very critical council meetings where we will be proposing these amendments on June 11th and June 17th. I highly encourage you, if you've never been to a council meeting in your life, this is the one to go to make your voice heard on what amendments are being proposed. I will share all this information in my newsletter and social media as well about the dates and times of these meetings. More voices in the room are helpful. It is our job to be on the dais until the last person makes public comment, and we listen to as many people as possible. So I hope you continue to stay engaged. And again, if you have questions and want more information about our budget through the city administration or through my channels, please message us as well. Thank you so much.
Thanks for that.